Good afternoon. Welcome to MCIE's spring webinar series on transition planning. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Barb Gruber from MCIE, and I will be your facilitator for this webinar. I want to remind you of the final webinar in this series, which is on May 7th, and our presenter is Meg Griggle, and she'll be talking about post-secondary education. Also, during this session, you will be muted, and you can type questions in the chat window. Ellen will answer the questions at the end of the session. The session is being recorded, and the link will be sent out in a follow-up email within the week. Today's session is on customized employment with Ellen Condon. Ellen is the Transition Projects Director at the University of Montana's Rural Institute on Disabilities, where she has worked since 1996 on transition and employment for youth with significant disabilities. She is also a consultant with Mark Gold and Associates, Griffin Hammes Associates, and she serves as subject matter expert for the Office of Disability Employment Policy at the U.S. Department of Labor on the Employment First State Leadership Mentoring Project. Ellen has worked in the field of developmental disabilities since 1986. Prior to coming to Montana, her experiences included hands-on service delivery, program development, and program management in community residential and supported employment programs. At the Rural Institute, she has served as the principal investigator and project director for numerous federal and state-funded grants. She provides technical assistance, training, and on-site support to schools, agencies, and individuals and families, predominantly in the areas of employment, transition, and Social Security work incentives. She lectures and consults with schools and adult service agencies. She and her staff have produced numerous publications on transition issues and employment. It is my pleasure to have you with us this afternoon, Ellen. I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to change your presentation here.
Okay, thanks, Barb. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you fine.
Great. Okay. As Barb said, I'm going to talk to you guys today about customized employment. And this is an area that I have a great fondness for, as I'm really interested in working with youth and adults with real significant disabilities. And when I first came to Montana, when I was working in transition, I sought out schools that had students that they were really struggling to figure out what to do for post-school outcomes and employment for. And so today I want to share with you some of the strategies and what I've learned over the years working here and in my previous work about how we can look at students differently and how we can see the opportunities for everybody in terms of employment. And the strategy that I'm going to introduce to you, which my guess is that Mike Callahan probably spoke a little bit about in his session last week, is customized employment. And what customized employment is it's individualizing the employment relationship between a job seeker and an employer so that there's a win-win outcome for both parties. And it's a way to think about employment differently for folks that we really struggle with answering that question, what are they going to do for a job and who's going to hire them? And the other piece is that this is a really proactive way and a real creative way to look at meeting employer needs in the community for a variety of reasons. And when customized employment first came out in 2001, it was an initiative started by the Department of Labor. And the whole push behind customized employment was that the entire workforce, not just folks with disabilities, needed more flexibility around working. And so the initiative really started as a general workforce initiative. What we've found, though, is that the ability for us to truly individualize an employment setting and a job description for a particular job seeker who has significant impact of disability and challenges enables us the power and the strategies to find a job for everybody. The other piece that's really interesting, especially in these days and times, is that what we find is that employers still have needs. You know, we have this myth that employers aren't hiring, but if we can strategically meet their needs and boost their bottom line, and do so by providing a worker who happens to have a disability, they will hire. And we're finding this in rural areas and urban areas and around the country. So customized employment, I think there's a misperception that it's only for people with disabilities, but it's not. And it's a real powerful strategy. And it's real different from some of the strategies that we've used before in terms of the labor market approach to employment. And also it is different from supportive employment. And I think there's been a misperception, especially when customized employment first came out, that people thought it was the same thing. And I want to be able to share with you some of the distinctions, and hopefully you'll leave with a better clarity of how this really is a unique strategy and can be truly a very positive strategy. So I want to ask you guys something and see if I can do this without dumping us off. But I want to run a poll for you. Can I? So I want to run a poll for you guys and say, how many of you think that community employment is realistic for every student? And so there's an A, it's realistic for all students, a B for most students, and C, there's some students who just can't work in the community. So what do you guys think? Okay, it looks like we got about, I think we got most of you, but so 7 of you think that community employment's realistic for all students, and 4 of you think most students. And I think there's a lot of students that are a whole lot easier to think in terms of, uh-oh, Bart, how do I get back?
Okay, here. Close it. Oh, all right. Hang on.
I'm sorry.
No, not a problem.
I tried to be really techy, and look what happens.
That was really good, too. Here we go.
Okay. So, I think, I'm sorry, say that again.
I think, are you on slide 3 now? Is that where we are?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I'm actually not seeing the slides.
All right, 1 second here. Let's see what happened to you.
Okay, but I have them in front of me, so I'm just going to go. We're on slide 3. So
right.
what if we assume assumed that everybody would go to work? Oh, there we go. Good. So what if we started with that assumption that everybody that we work with as a student, regardless of the severity of disability, even if it's a student that uses mobility, they use a communication device, they don't initiate any communication, maybe they only have use, one movement in their hand. What if we assume even those guys are going to go to work? How would our day look different? as we head into the school building? How would our interactions with youth and families look different, even starting as young as kindergarten and first grade? You know, how would we really focus on youth in middle school at looking at them being more independent, them being more self-directing, them being, you know, alongside youth without disabilities rather than always with an adult staff person? I think if we started with that assumption and that presumption, days would look a whole lot different. And I was fortunate enough to get to work in Maryland years ago with Howard County school systems. And what they started was they started doing the process of discovery with the presumption that everybody was going to work with middle school youth. And by the end of 3 years, they had rolled out the process of discovery for all the students receiving special ed services in their middle schools. And what they saw was that people started looking for competence of students. They started looking at ways to fade support and support youth to be more independent, whether it be walking to the lunchroom, eating lunch with non-disabled peers, getting their own stuff at lunch, or even opening their snacks at break time. And so just holding that standard out that we're going to look at employment in the community for everybody helped give a vision that really structured what the day-to-day activities in classroom look like, as well as the transition planning when students were 14 and up, because in Maryland, I believe you guys start at 14. So, think about if paid community employment was our post-school outcome for all youth. What would we be working on in terms of skills? What would we be looking at in terms of work experiences? We'd probably be looking at, making sure that youth were exiting into a paid job before they left high school. And so what we would want to be doing is looking at how to make the most out of each work experience and how to make sure students were participating as much as possible, as independently as possible, and as competently as possible. And so what we'd be doing is implementing discovery, that process of getting to know who the person is at their best and what their skills are, what their ideal conditions for employment are. We'd be looking at gathering that information throughout the entire school day and on every work experience, because we'd have this vision that the day after high school, the student's going to have a paid job in the community. And for any of you familiar with the TEAM legislation, it's TEAM, and it's been proposed at the House of Representatives level, and it was just reintroduced recently. But what that legislation looks at is mandating that post-school outcomes are paid community-based employment for all youth, especially youth with intellectual disabilities. So that would really help us set the bar super high and also look at achieving employment for everybody. Some of the other changes that have happened recently are with Medicaid waiver services. And there's been some directive from CMS stating that pre-vocational services, such as day hab or workshop, is not an outcome service. Pre-vocational should be time limited, and it should lead to employment in the community if they're going to build Medicaid's funding for that. The other big thing that's kind of hot in our field right now is the Department of Justice ruling, whereby they looked at Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act and basically have ruled that equal access to least restrictive environment goes beyond just living situations, and it also includes work. So the Department of Justice is expecting all states in their plan to meet Olmstead law that they will be developing a plan to move people out of segregated work settings to community work settings. So part of what we need to know now is, okay, if we believe that most people can work, how do we do it? And I think that's been a tricky piece. Like, I think a lot of us have the vision that we want it to work, but how do we make it work? And a lot of our adults haven't had the opportunity to work in the community because we assume they weren't competitive or they weren't ready. And how Customize is truly different is that it begins with the premise that everybody's going to work. And it's up to us, teachers, school staff, agency staff, families, to figure out what it's going to look like. And so when you look back at the definition of customized employment, we have to identify the skills and abilities of students. We need to identify what they can contribute to an employer. And so if we're asking the question, are they ready for work? Are they competitive? We're probably not going to get the answers to that question. So what we need to do really is look at asking different questions. And if you guys didn't get the opportunity to listen to my Callahan last week, go back and listen to the Discovery webinar, because it really talks about what kind of questions we need to ask to get the information that enables us to think in terms of what's the student going to do for employment in the community? What can they contribute that an employer is going to pay for? And so going back to some of our traditional approaches to employment, when we looked at, is somebody competitive? Are they fast enough? Are they on task long enough? Do they multitask adequately? Are they, is their behavior appropriate and under control? You know, looking at whether or not somebody's competitive and ready, for students who, you know, who half of you thought, wow, there's probably a couple folks out there, I don't know how they're going to get a job. If we approach it from a labor market demand side employment path, those folks aren't going to work. Because what happens is that in demand-driven employment, the employer, we start looking for jobs with what's available in the community. We look at, you know, who has job openings. The employers identified a need, they've put together a job description, they've announced this opening, and then what happens? Those of us who want the job fill out an application, we compete for an interview, and then those of us lucky enough to get an interview and have our applications reviewed compete for the opening. For those folks who don't have a lot of flexibility and are real competitive, they're not going to win. And so we need a different way to access employment for that set of people. Because think about, like, you know, if we're thinking about the person who uses a motorized chair and a communication device, you know, as the employer here on the left is screening through all the potential applicants, that person at the bottom who's got the least generalizable skills, has the most complexity of disability, they're never going to get a job that way. And frequently, when we talk to job developers, they're still thinking in terms of approaching employers who are hiring. In customized employment, that's the last person we go to. We don't want to approach somebody who's hiring because it sets up this competitiveness that the folks who really struggle with employers or with employment don't do well in. So just because some adults and some students don't compete well doesn't mean that they can't work. It just means that we need to use a different strategy. And so we need to use a different strategy when we're approaching employers with job development, but also we need to introduce this alternative strategy to real young students and to families and to teachers. We need to get teachers and families and young adults themselves thinking, I can work in the community. I can earn a real paycheck. I do have something to contribute. However, if we're teaching them to fill out job applications and put their resume out and go to interviews, and those are the only type of strategies we're teaching them, we're doing them a disservice. We need to look at also, how do we help them identify what their skills are, what they could contribute to an employer, what situations work and don't work for them, like what are their ideal conditions for success, and also what are the tasks that they could offer employers. Because what you're going to see shortly is that when we talk about customized employment, we don't talk about job descriptions, which is a little counterintuitive for some of our funding systems, especially Voc Rehab, who really focuses on what's the job description, career title you want to go after. But what's happened with that funding stream is they become much more flexible in how they define the title, because somebody who doesn't compete well is going to have a customized position. It's going to be negotiated based on what they need in terms of work characteristics to be successful, and it's going to be contingent upon the unmet needs of the employer. And so that job description doesn't exist until we create it. That's one of the big defining features of customized employment. So part of the philosophy behind customized employment is that people can work without having to be ready or competitive. So say you have somebody, a student who is has a lot of behavior management issues, and you're thinking there is no way somebody's going to hire him in the community. At some point he may hit somebody, at some point he may break something. What we need to do instead is think about what are the conditions for that person's success. There's a young man that I placed a couple of years ago here in Montana, and he's somebody who part of his ideal condition for success was I was looking for a work environment that was really sturdy, because he does tend, when he gets upset, to try to put his body through walls, or sometimes people through walls. Things get broken. He's actually working in a stable, a horse stable, and he's doing a lot of physical labor, which works really well for him. He's outside. He's in an environment that's really interesting. And yeah, stuff happens still. However, looking at what his ideal conditions for success were, we had a much better chance at him getting hired than if I told him he needed to get his behavior under control before he could go out in the community. He was hired at the first job in, I think, February 2010, and actually got an additional job in August 2010, and he still has both those jobs, making minimum wage. He has something to contribute. He's strong, he can do the tasks, he's there when he needs to be, he does what's assigned to him. We've defined work individually for him. Based on the rest of his schedule, his family initially said, we think he could fit in 1 day a week, probably Monday morning, where it was quietest at the barn and where the most structured seasoned staff were on shift. So we started 2 hours a week. We eventually redefined his work, and so he works Thursdays as well for an additional 2 hours. For somebody else I worked with, how we defined work for her initially was working 20 minutes a day, having a 20-minute break, and then doing another 20 minutes. Because she was so medically fragile that if we pushed her over 20 minutes initially, she was going to start having seizures and then she'd be done for the day. So instead of thinking about, can somebody open their paper, compete for a job that's posted in those want ads, think differently. Think in terms of what's this person going to contribute. The other piece, like I said earlier, is that employers still have needs. They will hire if we can make a proposal to meet their unmet needs in a way that's cost effective for them. I would guess that a lot of employers are not advertising job openings. That's different from the fact that they're still hiring. Because again, in customized employment, we're not approaching employers who have a position. That's okay. We want to have a talk about what they need, what the culture of their workplace is, and we want to help them identify ways that hiring somebody in a different job description can actually help meet their unmet needs and also increase their revenue, or increase their service, increase their quality. And I'll explain that a little more in a moment. But customized is about matching individuals' contributions to the unmet needs of the employers. And so, like I promised earlier, I want to contrast customized employment with supported employment for you. And again, initially when customized employment first was getting talked about in our field of disability, people thought it was just job carving, or, oh, it's the same thing, different words. It's really not. It's taking the best of what we had in supported employment and adding some, I guess, some more strength and a few more strategies. It's a more proactive strategy than what we used in supported employment. In customized, we always start the conversation about employment with the job seeker. We don't start with who's hiring. We don't start with employers that typically hire people with disabilities. We start by asking who this person is in terms of what are their ideal conditions for success, where are they going to be most productive, most successful. You know, for the young man in the stable, he's most successful when he hasn't broken something or gotten really upset at work. So I had to think about what is it to the flow of the tasks, the predictability of the tasks, the physicalness of the tasks, and the structure of the environment. That's where I had to start the conversation about his job. It wasn't about who was hiring. In customized employment, we're going to initiate negotiation of a job on the job seeker's behalf. So we're going to approach employers and try to figure out what their unmet needs are and create a proposal to them. So in this case, the employers are reacting to us. They're not initiating putting together a job description. Most likely, we're going to represent the job seeker. And again, customized employment is an option for everybody, regardless of whether or not you have a disability. And also, customized employment it can be appropriate for anybody with a disability. It's necessary for somebody with a real significant and complex impact of disability. But you could use some of the features of customized kind of on a sliding scale. And, you know, referencing back to last week's webinar about some people need just adequate discovery to identify environments and supports that work and don't work for them. Other people are going to need some really intense discovery to identify what they can contribute to an employer and what their workday is going to look like. So additional features of customized employment include, we're still looking at one person in one job. All the employers who we contact, we offer a list of tasks that the person can do, and we initiate with that person, not the labor market. And we're very particular about which employers we contact, and they're all connected to what we learn about the person in discovery. We don't randomly go down the street and stop in and talk to employers. There's no sub-minimum wage. So whatever your minimum wage is in Maryland, that's the bottom line, the bottom wage that we'll accept for somebody with a disability in customized employment. Frequently, above minimum wage is the starting wage that's negotiated for people. We're talking in the community alongside people without disabilities, or if somebody owns their own business as an outcome of customized, it's a business they own and it's designed around their needs, their passions, their tasks. And again, any of you could use this strategy. So like I said earlier, we're asking different questions to get to a picture of what this person can do for employment. So instead of asking, are they ready? How do they compare to people without disabilities in terms of speed, accuracy? I want to know what they do and how they do it. So some of the information that you're going to be collecting in discovery is going to be narrative, descriptive, robust information instead of they did it with a prompt, they did it with a support staff, they are slower than all their classmates. If we can describe their performance, then we can identify skills, we can identify support needs, we can identify tasks. And all of that we reassemble into this proposed job description. Because in customized, we're going to focus on discrete tasks instead of job titles. So instead of office assistant, I'm going to look at the tasks that are involved. scanning documents, checking documents for accuracy, data input, answering the phone, taking messages. Because with the discrete tasks, they can cross numerous job descriptions and environments, and it leaves us more open to negotiating that end job description. And the other piece is that in customized, instead of identifying job openings, we're looking for unmet needs of specific employers. The other piece is that customized employment is driven by a customized plan. And so the duties are negotiated, people's accommodation needs are negotiated, what their supports are, and all, and that's all brought about through discovery and that process of identifying who this student is. And it fits really well with what we have to do annually for the IEP. We've got to look at student strengths, we've got to look at interests, we've got to look at present levels of performance and needs, and especially in transition. That assessment of present levels of performance helps us identify what our post-school outcomes are and also what our transition services are. This whole approach to employment fits exactly with what we're required to do anyway for special ed and IEPs and transition planning. And so if we're thinking post-school outcome is paid community-based employment, and we're shooting high. Again, schools are not obligated to achieve this, but that's the benchmark that best practice would say we should shoot for. And we may not be able to make it happen within the length of high school and your 18 to 21-year-old program, but that's the direction we need to be heading. So, how does that influence the skills we teach students? How do we ensure that they can use their communication devices with people they're unfamiliar with across environments? How do we work with them to ensure that they can direct themselves about, okay, this is the task I'm working on. They can determine when that task is finished. They can move to the next task, either because we've taught them how to manage their time through watches, through technology such as a time timer or an alarm watch, or some of the iPad apps. But I think if we're headed towards community-based employment, it's going to help us reference what's appropriate, what's functional within your classroom and in terms of an adult life. And for many of the students that we're not quite sure what they're going to do for employment, I think we also struggle with what's an appropriate, age-appropriate transition assessment. I advocate strongly for discovery and a vocational profile document or a transition assessment document, which is kind of a shortened profile that captures skills, abilities, very descriptive, narrative compilations of performance. Or what's really nice is having video clips as well of students doing life activities at home and work experience so that we can see what they're doing, what their support needs are, what support strategies are being used, and maybe look at, ooh, we're overusing those strategies. Let's back off and teach the students to self-manage and be more independent. The other piece that really influences students in schools is thinking in terms of we've got a limited time to give students as much exposure and experience in work before they exit. And school is the last time that they have entitlement to services. In Maryland, like many of our states, we have wait lists for students with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. So the likelihood of somebody working after graduation from high school increases monumentally if those students have a paid job before they exit. So in order to get to a paid job before they exit, we need to learn about students through an evolution of work experiences. We need to understand what their conditions for success are, and not just the students that can be independent at a work site, but those students who are going to have ongoing support needs. is there a way that we could provide some accommodations, figure out what kind of work environment naturally would be adequately supporting for them to go to work without a paid person with them all the time? What if that was our transition service? Over the next 4 years, we're going to identify the ideal conditions for independence and success at work, a list of skills and contributions, and a list of tasks for this individual. And so instead of asking whether or not people are ready and how they compare to other people, let's look at their conditions, their interests and passions, the contributions. And the more significant the impact of disability, the clearer we have to be before we approach an employer to negotiate a position. And we've got to be very upfront with what needs to be negotiated. For instance, there was a young woman that I worked with years ago who used a power chair. She did communicate verbally. Sometimes it took a while to get to know her to understand what she was saying, and you needed to give her some extra time, especially if she was upset, to get the words out. And part of what she needed in order to work without a paid person with her was she needed help with personal care. And I couldn't wait and kind of wing that once I got her on the job. That was something that needed to be negotiated up front. She was comfortable with working with one of her coworkers, and she actually paid her through a Social Security work incentive called a PASS plan to help her out once a day in the restroom. But I couldn't wait about that negotiation. Like many of us get to kind of customize and negotiate when we start, how long we do for break. You know, do we get out early if one of our kids has a play that afternoon? But for somebody who has more intense needs, we've got to be so clear on what the negotiables are that are required and negotiate up front with an employer. And so the process starts with discovery. It starts with answering that question, who is this person at their best? And looking at their performance at home, in the community, in school, and also in work experience. From there, we capture that information through a vocational profile, or sometimes in schools, I do it through a transition assessment. The really nice piece of having the time that you have in schools is that this could be a document that each case manager updates each year right before the IEP. You get a new picture of what the student's doing at home for life skills. You get a new picture of what learning strategies work for them, don't work for them, what they're training on for self-determination, for self-management, for work. You get a new picture of what they've learned and what they're showing at work experience. And once again, that fits perfectly for your age-appropriate transition assessment. If we are in a time-limited start discovery, go get a job, say your student's just about to graduate, we go from discovery, write the profile, have a planning meeting where we come up with the blueprint for what that job's going to look like, and then design a visual resume. I use visual resumes always to go out and represent job seekers to employers. That's something that Howard County Schools did. They put together visual resumes for middle schoolers so that they could introduce themselves in terms of what they could do, what a good day looked like, what how to support them to be real competent. And they started them with middle schools so that the middle schoolers introduced themselves to the high school teachers with their visual resumes. If we have a student that's ready to go to work, meaning ready age-wise, and they're about to exit out, not skill-wise, but then we would move on to meeting with employers, identifying unmet needs, negotiating a position, and then based on what we know about that student, coming up with a training plan for them in terms of who's going to train. Is it going to be the coworker? Is it going to be the job coach? What kind of accommodations do we need to negotiate? And so, again, the job seeker is the one that initiates job development. We go together, we go to the employer with a proposal, and we target employers who might have needs that this person can meet, and also who meet their ideal conditions. For the young man who, when he's stressed, tends to bump hard into walls, I'm not going to approach any employers that have a lot of fragile people or stuff. That would just be ridiculous. So, I'm going to look for employers that match the ideal conditions of, for him, it was a sturdy environment. For the young woman, it was a place where she was never alone. That was one of her conditions. And also a place that was accessible, bathroom as well as work floor. And so that position's negotiated. The negotiation is voluntary. Not all employers will be interested in going outside their job descriptions. Currently, how employers hire is they come up with what they need and they put together the tasks into one job description. And most of us have obtained our job through that strategy. What we're asking employers to do in customized employment is to unbundle the demands. So we're asking them, instead of looking at the existing job description, let's go back and let's look at unmet need. And so how we do this is we want to look at what their coworkers are doing, so what their employees currently are doing. We're going to look at the work environment to see if there's clues about things that aren't getting done. And if this is a business where there's customers, we're going to observe the customers a bit and see if we have a clue about unmet needs. And so one of the questions we're going to ask coworkers and the employer is, do you have tasks that don't get done that you really would like to get done? Or are they not getting done frequently enough or up to your standards of quality? We're also going to ask, are there tasks that some of your higher paid workers are currently doing that could be done by somebody at a lower pay grade? One great example of that is Project Search does a really nice job of finding tasks that could be done more cost effectively by other people. They work a lot in hospitals. One of the tasks that they talk about is loading crash carts in the ER. And what they found is that it was a very structured task. It's something that is very routine. It's somebody who is well skilled at identifying what's missing and what needs to go where, and doing it in an orderly manner. And it's very diligent about following that task list. Is very capable at loading crash carts. And so they negotiated those tasks for somebody with a disability to do instead of for the nurse who was getting paid probably $20 more an hour to do it. The other question we're going to ask to help employers identify unmet needs is, are there services that you could offer that would bring more customers, get people buying more, spending more time in your store, increase customer satisfaction? And that's another way to highlight unmet need. Now, a word of caution for schools. If you're in a business and you're doing unpaid work experience, you want to be careful about offering a lot of useful labor, because Department of Labor has regulations around people who are unpaid taking over pieces of jobs for people that are paid. So really follow the Department of Labor regs around that. This would be really particular for as you're talking about that paid job. And also thinking in terms of, wow, for somebody who doesn't compete well, what's the strategy to get into an employer? And part of what I wanted to emphasize in distinguishing customized from labor market and also from supported employment is that customized employment's more than a good job match. And just because the position's carved, it's not necessarily a customized position. When I was doing supported employment in Denver, we frequently had employers approach us and say, for instance, Pizza Hut, and say, we're hiring lots of folks with disabilities because we've realized that box folding is a task that could be done more cost effectively for Pizza Hut by somebody else. And so they carved out box folding, mixing sauce, and sometimes putting coupons on boxes. But there were probably 100 of those jobs across Colorado. And so not every individual job seeker is going to lead me to that same job. So while the job was carved, because the duties, the tasks were static and only were about the employer, not about the person, it wasn't customized. Instead, if we went to Pizza Hut and said, we have a young man who, these are his skills around cooking, these are his skills around clerical, these are his skills around manipulating objects such as boxes, and we offered tasks and we built a job description, if it had the box folded in it, fine, but it would have started with the person and would have been negotiated. And so in that sense, it could be a customized position. And so we'll end up with this negotiated position through a variety of means. All the tasks may come from one job description. We might have multiple job descriptions where we pull tasks and create a job description for our job seeker. Or it may be tasks that weren't being done before, and it's a created job description. Or sometimes, especially with smaller businesses who may not have the resources to hire a paid employee, what we may do is come up with a form of self-employment that looks at having a business within a business. You know, for instance, there was a young woman that my husband's agency worked with who wanted to work with kids and computers, and so the agency in Georgia was marketing her to daycare centers, and the daycare owners recognized that the service she would provide would be beneficial. They realized that families would buy it, but they didn't feel like they had the capital to hire her outright. So what she did was she started a computer tutoring business within the daycare. She invoiced the families for the number of hours that their son or daughter participated in tutoring, and there were supports available from the daycare business for her just based on where it was located. But it was a win-win for both parties. We may have somebody that owns their own standalone business, or we may have somebody that works on contract for a business. But what we need to learn about each individual in order to create this one-of-a-kind position is what are the ideal conditions for success in terms of the environment, support strategies, the work schedule and flow, what the tasks look like, sometimes what the materials look like. You know, I was working with somebody recently, and part of a condition for him is work materials that aren't easily crumbled, or they're not going to get wrecked if they get wet. And just based on this guy, a lot of things go in his mouth, and as he handles something, he tends to kind of crunch it in his hands. So that's a big condition for him. What I'm still working on is what are the contributions and what are the tasks that he can perform, and where specifically is there an unmet need that I can match to. But this is information that you could be collecting throughout school, and especially during your age-appropriate transition assessments, and making sure that we pass it on to adult providers through your summary of performance when students exit. So again, if, you know, as students get different work experiences, we list out, or better yet, the student lists out, what new tasks did they learn? As the job developer starts working with them closer to exit, they can look at, well, based on these skills and based on the fact that they've done these tasks, we could train them to do these tasks. You know, make sure you're documenting what a well-matched job environment and task looks like for that student, so that the adult providers don't come in and have to relearn all about the student. And ideally, placement into a paid job prior to exits. So in order to customize, we've got to start by answering the question, who is the person? Rather than, are they ready? Can they compete? And so I wanted to share with you some resources And so Barb, help me out. What I need to do is share things from my computer screen, or can I just click on them?
You'll go up and get on the screen share.
Okay.
Click on that and activate the screen sharing. And then you can click on your sites, and they should be able. Everyone should be able to see them.
Okay.
So go ahead now and click on one of your websites.
Can you guys see the Mark Golden Associates site?
Oh, wait a minute. I just let me see if they're saying yes to that. If you can see it, can someone type in the chat box, please? I'm not seeing it here, so no, they can't. So you went to go back. You're
Can we go from, actually, can we go from your site and I'll walk you through where I want to show them?
I think maybe let's see. I lost that. Can you click out of, I think you've got screen share on, turn that off.
Okay.
Thanks for your patience, audience.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you what I wanted to show you guys as we're doing this, and hopefully we can get back. And Barb, I have this clock that's just going around and around and around on my computer.
Right.
So
can you see this? I just clicked on the ODEP site. You're seeing
I can't see it.
Okay.
Okay, but what I wanted to show you, there's 4 resources that have some great information around customized employment. And the first one is the Rural Institute on Transition website. And like Barb said initially, I've been at the Rural Institute for 16 years now, and much of my work here has been grant funded, and a lot of it was about developing products around employment and transition. And so if you go to our site, which is, it's on the last slide, it's http://ruralinstitute.umt.edu/transition. And I'm assuming that you guys can download these slides later, so you don't have to be writing as fast as I'm talking. But if you go to that...
Go ahead, Barb. Ellen, we're going to send the recorded webinar to folks after today. I'm just trying to get you back to your slides. You can keep talking. I'm just trying to figure out how to get us back.
Okay, sorry. And so if you go to the transition website, there is going to be an icon that says customized employment. And if you click on that, it's going to bring up information on discovery, information on the vocational profile, information on the planning meeting, and also on the visual resume. Then if you go to articles and products, there's going to be a transition workbook that we created years ago for youth and families to get them thinking in terms of what they want the day after high school to look like when they exit. And from there, then backing it out and saying, okay, based on where you think you want to live, what do you do now for skills at home? Do you cook your own meals? Do you do your laundry? Do you organize your downtime? Do you get up on your own? Do you clean up after yourself? All of that. And, back it out and say, okay, so here's your present level of performance. What do you need to learn before you move out into your own apartment? And so the whole idea is that it's a planning workbook for youth and families. What I've seen is that teachers have been using it in classes with transition students to help them think in terms of what do they want to ask for, what do they want to work on for transition goals for the next year. There's also, under articles and tools, there is a tab called forms, and that's where you're going to find the age-appropriate transition assessment format that I developed, kind of a shortened version of the vocational profile. My preference would be that everybody do the profile, but if they aren't, then the age-appropriate transition assessment would be a nice tool to capture information about folks. What some schools are doing, like there's Martin County School District in Florida, what they're doing is each year the new case manager gets on their website and updates what the person's present level of performance is in a different color ink from the last year. And so they're using that as part of their age-appropriate transition assessments. In Mark Golden Associates, that's your next resource, and that's www.markgold.com. And again, it sounds like Barb's going to send the slides out by tomorrow afternoon, so you guys don't have to be typing this or trying to listen or write it down. But on markgold.com, there's going to be many articles on customized employment, on capturing information in a vocational profile. There's going to be sample profiles. There's going to be a great article on discovery, if that's not something that Mike shared with you last week, and additional resources there. The ODEP, Office of Disability Employment Policy, is the next website that has phenomenal resources on customized employment. Because again, ODEP is the entity that initiated customized employment. And so they've done, in 2001, they funded several states, probably close to 17, to be looking at implementing and testing out customized employment. And so there, if you go to that link, and that link's going to be provided in the handouts, there is going to be questions and answers about customized employment. There's going to be, there's 3 to 4 different videos, one for youth, one for employers, and one just a general information video about customized employment. And you guys can download them, you can use them with families, you can use them with youth. There are also a couple articles. There's Customized Employment Profiles, Volume 2 is the one that I really like. It talks about all the different strategies involved in customized employment, and I found that to be really helpful as well. The last site is Griffin Hammis, and they also do quite a bit of customized employment. They do quite a bit of self-employment as well. And so there's many resources on www.griffinhammis.com. So if you're looking for more information on customized employment, visit any of those resources. You can contact people at those entities as well for information. And Griffin Hammis has done quite a bit of work, as well as Mark Golden Associates has in Maryland, with schools as well as some of the employment agencies. So who has questions?
Yes, we have about a minute or two to take some questions. So if you have one, if you want to type it in the chat box, that would be great. While we're waiting for that, I just want to thank you, Ellen, for being so bold as to use the technology to do the polling earlier on. I'm sorry that we lost the screen sharing piece. This is the first time I've actually used it, so that I'll take that. I need a little bit of work on that one. I'd like to thank everybody for their participation, and as we've noted in the chat box, we'll send the slides and the link for the recording by tomorrow afternoon. We have our final session of this series on May 7th with Meg Griggle, who will be talking about post-secondary ed, and it'll be a nice finish to this three-part series. And I don't see any, I'm going to unmute you for a minute, so the first one who gets in can ask.
All attendees are muted and may unmute themselves by pressing *6. All attendees are unmuted.
Now, if you're on a mobile phone or something, if you know the technology, it looks like Kathy Proctor, you could ask a question. But if you don't have one, yeah, there's some issue with the flash. It's showing me that you're muted because you there's some flash permission. So I'm sorry about that. Okay, Ellen, we're seeing some thank yous.
Okay, thanks for tolerating our technology issues.
Yes, we're going to work on that, but it was great. The information was fabulous. Thank you so much. I'll be in touch, and I'm going to turn the recording off now. All of you go and have a great evening.
Okay, there's somebody just typed in that they're parents with a transition age student.